Hi, I'm Ivania. They erased my name from the family records, threw parties without me, and told people I'd moved on, but what they really did was steal everything. I helped them build all behind my back. Until one forgotten clause, one overlooked paper trail flipped the silence into power. Ever been betrayed by the people you loved the most and had to choose between justice or peace? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching this from. I read every comment. It was a rainy Saturday in early spring when I realized just how deep the betrayal ran. I had just wrapped up a client meeting in San Antonio and decided to take the scenic route home, cutting through the old neighborhood where my parents still lived. As I turned onto Timberleaf Drive, I slowed down. Balloons twisted in the wind, and cars lined both sides of the street, their rain-speckled windows reflecting the overcast sky. A professionally printed banner hung from the garage, celebrating 10 years of excellence, Clara's legacy. Clara, my older sister. Not my parents, not the family, just her. I pulled over 2 houses down and watched from behind the steering wheel. Strangers in crisp suits and pastel dresses filtered in through the open front door, the kind of people who knew how to keep their shoes clean in a muddy driveway. My grip tightened on the wheel. I shouldn't have been surprised, but the sting still cut deep. The family business was something we'd all built together. Late nights, missed vacations, endless paperwork. Yet here they were celebrating her alone as if I'd never even existed. I drove away before someone spotted me. Back at my apartment, I dropped my keys on the counter, the metallic clink echoing through the empty kitchen. I kicked off my rain-soaked shoes and slumped onto the couch, staring at the popcorn ceiling until my vision blurred. Why did this hurt more than it should have? Was I really that disposable? I had no answer, just a deep, nagging ache that spread like a slow poison. I forced myself up and pulled out an old storage bin from my closet, the kind with cracked plastic edges and a faded, duct-taped lid. Inside were pieces of my past yellowed report cards, childhood drawings, faded postcards, and an old silver locket with a small A engraved on the front. My mother had given it to me on my 18th birthday. "You're strong, Ivania," she'd said, clasping it around my neck. Never forget that, I used to believe her. Near the bottom of the bin, buried beneath a stack of outdated tax forms and forgotten birthday cards, I found a thick envelope still sealed with my name scrawled across the front in my mother's flowing cursive. I hesitated, my pulse quickening as I turned it over in my hands. The postmark read almost a year ago, just before Clara moved back into our parents' house after her second divorce. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and slid the papers out. It was a copy of the original family trust dated 15 years prior, naming me as a 50% co-owner of all our family's properties, businesses, and investments. My parents had signed it, their familiar loops and slashes inked in the margins. My name, my claim, clear and undisputed. But then I noticed the attached addendum dated just 8 months ago. My heart sank as I read it. They had rewritten the trust, cutting me out completely. Every asset, every share, every piece of property, all of it transferred to Clara. And the signature. It looked like my mother's, but something about it felt off the lines, too stiff, the spacing unnatural. I knew her handwriting like my own. This wasn't it. I sat there, the papers shaking in my hands, my mind racing. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. An unknown number, I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, a flicker of old defiance, made me answer. "Ivania," a man's voice deep and hesitant. "This is Gerald Westbrook, your parents' former estate attorney. I know this is out of the blue, but I've been meaning to follow up about the trust transition paperwork you never returned." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He paused. I could hear the sound of papers rustling on his end. "It was sent to your address months ago, certified mail, but it was returned. Your sister Clara signed for it." My heart pounded so loudly I almost missed his next words. "If you have a moment, I'd like to meet. I believe there are some things you should know." The line clicked dead, leaving me alone in the dim, flickering light of my kitchen. I stared down at the trust documents, my mind, a chaotic whirl of anger, disbelief, and a slowly growing determination. They had tried to erase me, not just from the family, but from everything I had helped build. But they had underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. The next morning, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. My mind replayed the attorney's words over and over. Your sister, Clara, signed for it. I had never authorized anyone to act on my behalf, let alone my sister. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a move, a deliberate attempt to cut me out. I threw on an old hoodie and jeans, my mind too tangled to care about appearances, and drove to the post office. The morning was cold, the kind that makes every breath feel sharp and every sound seem louder. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of packing tape and printer toner. I approached the counter, hands shoved deep in my pockets to keep them from shaking. Hi, I need to check on a certified mail package that was supposedly signed for on my behalf, I said, forcing a tight smile as the clerk glanced up. She nodded, fingers tapping keys with practiced speed. What's the address? I rattled it off, and she hummed thoughtfully, eyes flicking between the screen and me. It says here. The forwarding history was updated about 8 months ago. The recipient name was changed to Clara Winters. She looked at me, eyebrows slightly raised, as if this was a routine misunderstanding. My stomach twisted. I didn't authorize that. She paused, her fingers freezing over the keyboard. I'm sorry, but it was done digitally. The verification came from an IP address linked to your family's business office. I forced a calm breath, my pulse a steady drumbeat in my ears. Can I get a copy of that change request? She hesitated, then nodded. Give me a moment. I waited, the hum of the fluorescent lights above buzzing like angry wasps. When she returned, she handed me a printout, a single sheet with a digital signature and a timestamp that matched the day Clara had supposedly signed for the trust papers. I took it without a word, my fingers trembling slightly as I folded it into my pocket. I forced myself to say, "Thank you," before walking back to my car. Sitting behind the wheel, I unfolded the paper, eyes scanning the document. The signature at the bottom, supposedly mine, looked close, but not quite right. Too neat, too controlled, the loops tighter than my usual rushed scrawl. A cold anger began to simmer in my chest. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was theft. They had erased me from my own life, my own legacy, and tried to cover it up with digital trickery. I drove straight to Westbrook's office, my mind racing with 1,000 half-formed plans. When I arrived, the receptionist barely had time to look up before I pushed through the frosted glass door to his office. Westbrook, a tall, gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a voice that had likely intimidated more than one courtroom, glanced up in surprise. "Avanya," he said, standing. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." I dropped the printout on his desk, explain this. He picked it up, his brow furrowing as he read. He flipped the page over, then looked at me, his eyes suddenly sharper. "This is unusual." "Unusual," I almost laughed. "This is fraud." He exhaled, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. "I need to make some calls." "Sit tight." I didn't sit. I paced the small office, suddenly feeling too tight, too suffocating. My eyes landed on the framed law degree behind his desk, the neat stacks of paper on his shelves, the faint scent of leather and old books that clung to the air. Minutes later, he hung up the phone, his expression grim. "Your sister's actions are highly irregular. If she signed this without your consent, it's a violation. We can challenge this, but it won't be simple." I leaned over his desk, palms pressed against the cool surface. "Then let's make it simple. I want my share back. I want my name restored. And I want them to know they can't just erase me." He nodded slowly, the hint of a smile breaking through his stern demeanor. "I'll get started on the paperwork. But Avanya..." He paused, meeting my eyes. "This is going to get messy." I straightened, the anger in my chest hardening into something sharper, something almost satisfying. I can handle messy. As I walked out of his office, the cold air outside felt different. Less biting, more alive. I wasn't just reclaiming my name, I was preparing for a fight. I spent the next few days combing through every scrap of family paperwork I could find. Old tax records, property, deeds, business agreements. Anything that might prove I was more than just a footnote in the story my family had rewritten without me. One night, I found myself sitting cross-legged on the floor of my small apartment, surrounded by stacks of files and crumpled receipts. A forgotten cup of cold coffee sat beside me, the bitter scent mingling with the musty smell of old paper. My laptop hummed softly on the couch, its screen full of scanned documents and bookmarked legal codes. It was exhausting, but the anger kept me sharp, my mind constantly spinning through possibilities and strategies. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure they regretted ever crossing me. Then buried beneath a stack of faded manila folders, I found it. An old handwritten note from my father. It was dated 6 years ago, back when we were still a team, still a family. It read, "Avania, remember, you're always my right hand, my steady compass. Without you, this whole thing falls apart. Never forget that." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I remembered the day he wrote it, a late summer evening when we were knee-deep in financial paperwork trying to keep the family business afloat during a rough quarter. He had looked tired, but his eyes had sparkled with a mix of pride and exhaustion. I clutched the note, my thumb tracing the faint smudge where his hand must have brushed the ink. I had been more than just a silent partner in our family's success. I had been the backbone, the steady one, the constant. And now they had cut me out, replaced me like an outdated office chair, and tried to cover their tracks. The next morning, I made my way to the county courthouse. The building loomed above me, its gray stone facade streaked with decades of weather and wear, the heavy glass doors reflecting the overcast sky. Inside, the air was cool and sharp, the echoes of shuffling feet and murmured conversations bouncing off marble floors. I approached the records desk, forcing a polite smile at the weary-looking clerk behind the counter. "Hi, I need copies of the property deeds for the Winters family estate and business holdings." She glanced at me, then typed my request into her computer team. "Avania Winters." Her eyes flicked up, a hint of recognition sparking in her tired gaze. "Ah, the family that owns the Winter holdings, right?" I forced a tight smile used to. She printed the documents without further comment, the pages sliding into the tray with a mechanical clatter. I snatched them up, flipping through the crisp sheets as I walked back to my car. As I sat behind the wheel, I let the papers rest on my lap, their legal jargon and fine print suddenly feeling heavier than the cold metal key in my hand. There it was, in black and white. Every property, every business share, every penny of my family's wealth had been quietly transferred to Clara. But then I noticed something odd. One of the deeds, the one for the Winter Ridge property, our old family vacation cabin, had a notarized signature that looked off. It was my father's name, but the loops were wrong. The letters too tight, too precise. I had seen his real signature 1,000 times on birthday cards, school forms, business contracts. This wasn't it. My heart raced as I flipped to the notary seal, my pulse thudding in my ears. The name stamped beside the signature belonged to someone I didn't recognize, a notary I had never heard of. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. They hadn't just cut me out. They had forged my father's name to do it. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking. I stumbled into my apartment, tossing the papers onto the kitchen counter as I fumbled for my phone. I dialed Westbrook's number, pacing back and forth across the linoleum, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Westbrook, he answered, his tone as sharp and steady as ever. I found something, I said, the words tumbling out before I could catch my breath. "One of the deeds? It's forged. My father's signature. It's not his." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I snapped, my heart pounding. "I know his signature. I'm looking at it right now." Westbrook exhaled the sound, crackling through the receiver. "All right, this changes things. I'll need a copy of that document. Meet me at my office tomorrow." I hung up without another word, my fingers still trembling as I set the phone down on the counter. I leaned back against the cool surface, staring at the pile of papers that suddenly felt like a mountain. They had tried to erase me to cut me out of the only life I had ever known, and they had done it with lies and forgeries. But I wasn't going to be erased. Not this time. The next morning, I arrived at Westbrook's office with a knot of dread tightening in my chest. I clutched the forged deed in one hand, my mind replaying the moment I realized just how deep my family's betrayal had gone. They hadn't just tried to cut me out, they had broken the law to do it. The receptionist greeted me with a polite nod as I pushed through the glass doors, my steps echoing sharply on the polished tile floor. Westbrook met me at the door to his office, his sharp eyes immediately landing on the papers in my hand. "Let's see what you've got," he said, stepping back to let me in. I dropped the documents onto his desk, my hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins since the night before. He sat down, adjusting his glasses. As he flipped through the pages, I watched his expression change. The slight furrow of his brow, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle shift in his posture as he reached the forged signature. "This is problematic," he murmured, his finger tracing the uneven loops of my father's name. "If this is a forgery, then we're dealing with a much more serious issue than a simple trust dispute." I crossed my arms, leaning against the edge of his desk. "What does that mean for me?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he met my eyes. "It means you have a case, a strong one. But it also means that things are about to get a lot more complicated." "Complicated how?" Westbrook sighed, setting the papers down with a soft thud. "Your sister didn't just overstep her boundaries. She committed fraud. If this goes to court, it could get ugly for everyone involved." I felt a flicker of hesitation, a brief, unsteady moment of doubt. My mind flashed back to family dinners, summer vacations, the warmth of my mother's hug, my father's quiet pride. But then I remembered the way they had erased me, the way Clara had signed my name without a second thought. The cold, calculated betrayal that had cut me out of my own life. "Let it get ugly," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm done being erased." Westbrook gave a slow nod, a hint of respect flickering in his eyes. "All right, I'll start the paperwork. But Vania, once we go down this road, there's no turning back." I met his gaze, my heart pounding. I understand. That night, I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the faint hum of the refrigerator. The only sound as I scrolled through years of family photos on my laptop. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, pausing on a picture from a 4th of July barbecue 5 years ago. We were all there. My parents, Clara, my cousins, even my awkward sunburned teenage self holding a sparkler and grinning like I hadn't a care in the world. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening as I realized that those moments were gone, tainted by betrayal and secrets. I leaned back, closing the laptop with a quiet click, and stared at the ceiling. I had always been the steady one, the quiet one, the one who never rocked the boat. But now, for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of something different. Rage. Not the explosive screaming kind, but the cold, slow-burning anger that settles deep in your bones. The kind that doesn't just simmer. It calcifies, hardening into resolve. I opened my laptop again, my fingers flying over the keys as I searched for every scrap of digital evidence I could find. Emails, text messages, bank statements, anything that might prove that my family had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. I found old emails from my mother, gentle reminders to be patient and give Clara some space. Messages from my father thanking me for my help with the business during the tough years. Dozens of texts from Clara dripping with false warmth. Her words carefully chosen to keep me just close enough to be useful, but far enough to be ignored. As I pieced together the timeline of their betrayal, my rage slowly sharpened into something more precise, more dangerous. A plan. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, casting a pale gray light through my kitchen window, I had a folder full of damning evidence and a fire in my chest that no amount of nostalgia could extinguish. They had tried to cut me out to erase me from my own family. But I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to make sure they never forgot what they had tried to steal. I barely slept that night. My mind too wired, my pulse too fast. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's smug smile, my parents' indifferent faces, the twisted signatures on those legal documents. By dawn, I had a plan. I didn't want just revenge. I wanted restoration, to take back what they had stolen and make them feel every inch of the distance they had tried to put between us. First, I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. Not just the questionable signatures, but a clear, irrefutable paper trail that even the best lawyer couldn't ignore. I started with the family business records, logging into the old accounting system I hadn't touched in years. My father had once trusted me with the passwords, and apparently they hadn't bothered to change them. As the digital files loaded, my heart raced. I scrolled through years of financial transactions, the numbers blurring together until I finally found what I was looking for: a series of suspicious transfers. Large sums moved from joint accounts into Clara's private funds, starting around the same time they had cut me out of the trust. I clicked through the records, my fingers tightening around the mouse as I traced the path of the money. From the family business to a shell corporation Clara had set up in her name, then funneled into a luxury investment portfolio. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, sloppy but bold, hidden in plain sight. I felt a small, grim smile stretch across my lips. She hadn't just stolen my share. She had robbed the entire family using my parents' trust as her personal piggy bank. Next, I searched my email archives, digging through years of old messages, half-forgotten chains, and dusty digital correspondence. I found dozens of emails from Clara, sweet and syrupy on the surface, but dripping with quiet manipulation underneath. "I'll take care of the paperwork." "Don't worry. Dad said you might be too busy to handle this, so I took care of it for you. Don't stress about the trust update. I've got it under control." I saved every single one, screenshots piling up on my desktop like digital ammunition. Then I dug into the property records. It took a few hours of cross-referencing tax documents and old real estate filings, but I found it. Proof that the Winter Ridge property had been transferred without my consent, the deed signed by the same mysterious notary I had uncovered at the courthouse. Finally, I turned to the personal. I pulled out my old photo albums, flipping through the pages with a bitter smile. My family, all smiles and hugs in the pictures, the years of holidays and birthdays and beach vacations captured in glossy, fading snapshots. But as I turned the pages, I noticed something. I had slowly started to disappear. In the early photos, I was front and center, my father's arm around my shoulder, my mother beaming beside me. But as the years passed, my presence faded. My face cropped out of group shots, my name missing from handwritten notes, my accomplishments replaced by Clara's glittering, carefully curated successes. It was like they had been erasing me long before they put it on paper. By the time I closed the last album, my hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. They had tried to erase me, to rewrite our family's history with my name carefully scratched out. I wasn't just going to fight back, I was going to expose them. I compiled everything: the bank records, the forged signatures, the emails, the photos, into a neat chronological file on my laptop. I named it Restoration. Then I made a few phone calls. First to Westbrook. He needed to know what I had found to prepare for the legal storm that was about to hit. Then to an old family friend, a reporter I hadn't spoken to in years. She had covered our family's business success in the past, back when my parents had paraded us around as the perfect example of a tight-knit, all-American family. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and curious. "Avania! Wow, it's been ages. What's up?" I took a deep breath, my fingers gripping the edge of my desk. "I have a story for you, one you're going to want to hear." I spent the next hour laying it all out. The betrayal, the forgery, the hidden accounts, the slowly tightening noose my family had slipped around my neck. She listened without interrupting, her quick, practiced breaths, the only sign that she was still on the line. When I finally finished, there was a long, heavy pause. "Holy hell," she whispered. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "And I want to go public." Another pause, then a sharp, satisfied laugh. "All right, let's do this. I'll make some calls. Send me everything you have." I hung up, my heart racing, the fire in my chest burning hotter than ever. They had tried to bury me, to erase me, to cut me out of my own story. But they had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated me. 2 days later, the morning of the family shareholders meeting, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting the collar of my blazer. The face staring back at me looked different, sharper, more determined, with a fire in the eyes that hadn't been there just a week ago. I had always been the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who avoided conflict and smoothed over the cracks in our family's carefully polished image. But not today. Today, I was the storm. I grabbed the neatly organized folder from my desk, the one I had labeled restoration, and slipped it into my leather satchel. My laptop phone and a spare USB drive with all the evidence I had collected joined it. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked out the door. The conference room at my family's headquarters was exactly as I remembered. Cold, sterile, the walls lined with framed photos of business milestones, all featuring my parents and Clara front and center. I had been cropped out of most of them, my contributions quietly erased from the narrative. I arrived 10 minutes early, the first one to the table. The long, polished wood surface reflected the overhead light stretching out like a battlefield before me. I set my folder down, opened my laptop, and took a seat near the head of the table. They trickled in, slowly. My parents first, then Clara, flanked by 2 of her personal attorneys, young, sharp-suited men with the slick, predatory looks of corporate sharks. Clara shot me a tight, icy smile as she took her seat across from me, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the table in a steady, arrogant rhythm. "Didn't expect to see you here, Ivania," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "You've been so distant lately." I met her gaze, my own expression as cold and sharp as the edge of a blade. "Oh, I've been here, just not where you wanted me." Before she could respond, the meeting officially started. My father cleared his throat, his eyes flicking between me and Clara with a hint of unease. He opened his leather-bound notebook, the one he had always used for big meetings, the one I had bought him as a birthday gift years ago. "All right, let's get started," he said. His voice steady, but lacking the warmth I remembered from my childhood. First on the agenda, the trust realignment. I forced myself to sit still, my fingers resting lightly on my laptop's keyboard. I had practiced this moment 100 times in my head, rehearsed every line, every piece of evidence, every strategic pause. Clara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at my laptop. "Ivania, if you're here to contest the trust, I should warn you. We've already had it reviewed by our legal team. It's airtight." I let a small, bitter smile slip onto my lips. "I'm sure you think so." I tapped a key, and the projector in the corner of the room whirred to life, casting a bright rectangle of light onto the wall behind me. I clicked through a few folders, pulling up the scanned images of the forged signatures, the questionable property transfers, the embezzled funds. "Let's start with this," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "This is a copy of the original family trust signed by both of our parents, legally binding and very clear about my 50% share of the family assets." I clicked to the next slide, the image of the forged signature filling the screen. "And this is the version you submitted to the county records office with a signature that looks close but isn't quite right." Clara's smile faltered, her hand freezing mid-tap. I continued, my pulse pounding in my ears. I had a handwriting expert review this. The loops, the slant, the pressure. It's not my father's signature. It's a forgery. My father's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he leaned closer, his jaw tightening. My mother paled, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "And this," I said, clicking to the next slide, "is a record of the property transfer for the Winter Ridge cabin, signed by a notary who, as it turns out, is an old college friend of yours, Clara." I glanced at her, watching the blood drain from her face, her carefully composed mask slipping for the first time. I clicked to the next slide. A series of bank statements, each one showing large, unauthorized transfers from the family business accounts to Clara's private funds. And here we have a classic embezzlement trail, money siphoned from our joint accounts into a shell corporation you set up in your name, then funneled into a private investment portfolio. The room fell into a stunned silence. The only sound, the faint hum of the projector. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. You didn't just try to cut me out of the family. You tried to steal my share of everything we built together, and you did it with forged documents, hidden accounts, and a notary who should probably be expecting a visit from the state licensing board. Clara's attorneys whispered furiously to each other, their carefully composed expressions crumbling as they flipped through their notes. My father looked like he might be sick, his face pale and drawn, his hands trembling slightly on the polished wood table. My mother just stared at me, her eyes glassy, her lips parted in a silent, desperate plea. I clicked to the final slide. A neatly formatted letter addressed to the county clerk formally contesting the trust transfer and requesting a full investigation into the forgeries, the financial misconduct, and the breach of fiduciary duty. I've already filed this, I said, closing my laptop with a quiet click. Expect a call from the district attorney. I stood, slipping my laptop and folder back into my satchel and straightened my blazer. For the first time in years, I said, meeting each of their shocked, broken gazes in turn, I'm finally taking back what's mine. I turned and walked out of the conference room, my footsteps echoing in the silent, tension-thick air, the weight of a decade of betrayal finally falling from my shoulders. As I pushed open the glass doors to the street outside, the cool air hit my face sharp and clean, the sun cutting through the gray clouds above. I had done it. I had taken back my name, my legacy, my life. And I had never felt stronger. Story 2. Hello, I'm Caitlin, and I never thought I'd make it through this, much less tell it. In a courthouse restroom, my sister shaved my head while holding me down, said it was for control and order, but in reality it was only to shatter me before I even took the stand. She was unaware that the man she laughed off as a nobody, the man she loves, was going to enter wearing the robe she believed she possessed, and she wasn't prepared for what he read aloud as he took the bench. But first, let me explain what transpired when the gavel dropped. Where are you seeing this from? Please, what time is it? Where are you? Leave a comment below with it. The air had a damp, stone-like scent. The morning fog encased old Charleston. The steady, crisp click of my heels on the courthouse steps reverberated louder than the sound I felt within. The leather portfolio, which I had brought to my dissertation defense years prior, became more tightly gripped in my palm. I had felt ready that morning. Today, not at all. It was not meant to be about me. I was only here to watch, perhaps assistance. That's what I told myself anyhow. The antiseptic lights inside glistened on the marble floor. As I went past, the security guy hardly raised his head, but others did. I was followed by those eyes that said, "Why is she here?" It was never straightforward, just a few quick looks from those I used to consider family. Across the atrium, I saw them. My mom had a rigid stance. She crossed her arms as if she were preparing for a blow. And my elder sister Celine sits with her legs crossed, grinning as if she had already won all in a beautiful ivory jacket. Something I was not aware I was vying for. I continued to walk. I was waved over by a woman at the registration desk. She spoke in a kind yet indifferent tone. "Name, Caitlin Monroe," I replied with a little smile. She gave me a badge after glancing down at her list and scowling a little. I accepted it without seeing, but as soon as I fastened it to my blazer, a shiver ran up my spine. Bold black lettering are printed. All right. No one. I blinked. "This is incorrect," I said in a forceful but hushed voice. "Monroe should be written there. Caitlin Monroe." She hardly raised her head. "Ma'am, that's what the list says. You'll have to wait if you want to talk to someone. However, you need a credential to access the courtroom." The remarks struck more forcefully than they ought to have. I wasn't shocked at all. Not at all. Celine watched me from the other side of the atrium. Slowly and gradually, she lifted her phone, and when her screen mirrored my badge, I heard the gentle click of a photo, like a kid who has perpetrated a practical joke and is eagerly awaiting the punchline. She cocked her head and smiled. I didn't recoil. I simply turned aside after nodding. I wasn't going to give her the response she desired. If this was a game. I smoothed the emblem against my breast as though I wore it with pride, but my hand was there for too long, firmly pressed. The edges were cutting at my palm. It was as though someone had written down their honest assessment of me. As if I were unimportant wasn't appropriate. Perhaps they thought so. Perhaps they wanted me to accept it as well. There was silence in the courthouse hallway. Too silent. I felt as though my shoes were digging into the ground with every stride. When I went by, my mother turned away. Not much, but enough. This was more than simply a legal matter. It was a message. Celine had done it with style, and the badge was a statement. Far from the family rows, I took a seat on the far side. I looked down once more as I sat. All right. No one, not even a typo. A decision. In this family, I might have always been a ghost. The silent one. Sure, too easily, said the one. The one who chose to remain silent because she believed it to be a noble act. Perhaps they thought I was weak because I didn't say anything. I tightened my hold on the badge, allowing the edges to dig in until I sensed a sharp object across the aisle. Perhaps a warning? Celine laughed behind our mother's hand after leaning over and whispering to her. They no longer even made an effort to conceal it. The doors to the court opened. Individuals moved inside, papers, rustling heels, clicking. Someone coughing in the distance, either bored or resentful. I got up to go in. Slowly. Celine walks past me, her perfume following her like a second skin. She whispered, leaning in close enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath. You weren't invited. Caitlin, she didn't wait for a response, and since I already knew what this was, I didn't give her one. Their custody hearing was not this one. I owned it. With a soft thud that reverberated louder than it should have in a courtroom full of waiting eyes and whispers, the door closed behind me. I sat in the back, close to the counsel table, but far enough away to be invisible if that were possible in a room meant to be seen. Like an insult I hadn't requested, the badge was still stuck to my blazer. I straightened my posture. I crossed my legs and made an effort to blend in with the chair's fabric. The judge was still not there. The docket did not include me. Officially, no. I was only here to support a distant cousin's custody hearing, or at least that's what I had been told. That's the story Celine gave me anyway. Now, I wasn't so sure there ever was a cousin. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as Celine's attorney stood smoothing the front of his suit with theatrical precision. His voice was calm but heavy with performative authority. Your Honor, we'd like to begin our statement with a brief presentation just to provide some necessary context about the environment surrounding this case. Context. That word hit me wrong. I blinked as the screen on the far wall lit up a projector. Buzz softly, a PowerPoint interface blinked to life, and there it was. My face, huge, blown up tenfold. My shoulders hunched. My expression, mid-blink, caught off guard. And below my face, the badge. Clear as daylight. All right. No one gasps fluttered across the room like a wave breaking on a shore. A few people shifted in their seats. One juror raised their eyebrows, another whispered to someone next to them. Celine's attorney gestured with one hand, smooth as a salesman. This image was taken just this morning. We believed it was vital to highlight how certain persons have injected themselves into this procedure, uninvited, unannounced, and possibly unstable. Unstable, I held the bench so firmly my nails pushed into the smooth wood. I didn't move, didn't blink. The lights made the moisture accumulate along my collarbone. I pushed my jaw not to tighten. I wasn't going to let them take that. The lawyer tapped the clicker again, bringing up a second slide, metadata and timestamps. But something was odd. The time code showed the shot had been taken at 7:16 a.m. before court even opened. Before I came? That's not feasible. I had parked at 7:52. I had checked the court map and seen the time, so I recalled I had even taken my own picture of the courthouse, time-stamped. My throat became parched, like gears grinding against one another. My thoughts fell into place. They had pretended the timestamp metadata had been changed by Celine or someone close to her. She wasn't only making fun of me, I was being framed by her. The judge broke the hush with a whisper. Did Miss Monroe appear on the list of witnesses? Something too self-satisfied to be a coincidence, curved the lawyer's lips. No, Your Honor. She came in on her own initiative, put on the badge, sat down, and well. His voice drifted off as if saying the rest hurt him. People cannot be taught limits. I looked in Celine's direction. She avoided eye contact. She didn't have to. She anticipated my glance. She just watched the TV with pride after straightening her skirt. This was a strategy I had seen before many years ago. 16 years old precisely. Since we were little, our parents have celebrated our dual birthdays with a celebration every year. However, Celine had neglected to put my name on the invitation that year. She never corrected the entire class who had arrived, believing it was only her celebration. I had eaten cake by myself that evening while sitting on the swing set in the backyard, acting as though I didn't mind being erased. This courtroom, this time. In public, that same sting was amplified. I wasn't 16 this time, though, and I wasn't going to vanish. I took a moment to close my eyes, not to weep, to reassemble. All around me, the courtroom was murmuring, but I was looking and evaluating. Then I saw him in the far corner in the back. A guy sat in silence, folded arms. No laptop, no notes. It was a well-worn but tidy suit. He wasn't looking at the lawyer. Celine was their target. Neither smiling nor blinking, like someone who had witnessed a mass fall before he watched her. He did not appear to be press. He didn't speak in a whisper. He only watched, as well as the way he leaned closer to Celine while she talked. He seemed to be waiting. For the moment, not for the tale. She would trip. He made no notes before I could figure out who the man in the back was. He just observed Celine as if he already knew who she was. The tension was broken by a gentle rustle. A clerk carried the simple sealed envelope over to the judge. It was sharp and menacing, with no marks or imprints. There was something about the wrinkled forehead of the judge. Informed me that it wasn't included in the first procedures. Your Honor, quietly, the clerk said. Just today, something was delivered. Urgently marked sender, who is anonymous. Slowly, as if peeling back something putrid. The judge opened it. Once more, the courtroom became silent. He glanced over the contents, then hesitated longer than he ought to have. After a much too lengthy gaze in my direction, he turned to face the court reporter. Kindly add this to the hearing exhibits as a supplement. With a deep sigh, he put the page down after giving instructions and tapping it twice. Then he gave me a direct glance. He remarked in a controlled yet compassionate manner. Miss Monroe, do you know that the Charleston Mental Health Institute has a psychological examination from November 2012 that has your name on it? My heart twitched. My throat tightened as I spoke. That year, that location, I hadn't mentioned it in more than 10 years. I hardly gave it any thought. Therapy wasn't what it was. It wasn't getting better. It was sterile paperwork wrapped in silence. The lawyer got back up. The curvature of lips was too controlled to be genuine. We only present this to give you the whole picture of Miss Monroe's mental health, Your Honor. A concerned party discovered the document. We think it says a lot. The projector was activated by the Page Clinical Poor Diagnosis, Behavioral Dysregulation, and Emotional Instability. Since the words weren't mine, I didn't recognize them. I was not one of them. I wasn't erratic. I was 22 and locked outside during a snowstorm by my sister. I was barefoot, sobbing after she had turned the deadbolt and turned off her phone. It was supposed to be funny. Her buddies giggling from the window. She'll be fine. She always worries out over nothing. I had fainted on the steps, partly frozen, trembling violently until a neighbor phoned an ambulance. But the next morning, our mother had whispered, "This is what happens when you overreact. People will think you're crazy. Do you want that?" She drove me herself quietly, deliberately to a hospital an hour away. She signed the papers. I stayed there for 72 hours, and when I got back, no one in the family brought it up again. Not even me. Not until now. My heart pounded like it was trying to claw its way out. But my face remained still. Celine could see me break, but I wouldn't let her. She remained still at the table. She had her hands folded and her lips pressed together, but there was a slight upward movement at the corner of her mouth, as if this were her masterpiece hanging on the gallery wall. At last, I told myself, this isn't therapy. Erasure is what it is because they did just that. Turn all I've suffered into a dishonorable work of fiction. You don't need the truth if you are in charge of the story. I turned to look at my mom. There she stood, 2 rows behind Celine, holding her purse tightly, as if it were about to blow up. She avoided eye contact. She cast her gaze downward. She did, of course. In response, the judge asked if I had any statements. I cleared my throat and gently stood up. It wasn't fear that made my voice tremble. That file wasn't made with my permission. I never received a diagnosis. Family members put me in that hospital to avoid attention, not because I posed a threat to anyone. The actual risk was being shut out of a storm simply for existing. There was a ripple of murmur. The judge remained silent. I simply nodded so that my statement would be recorded. No judgment, no acknowledgement, just paper. Because in a courtroom, facts don't matter, only what's written. I sat down and caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. The man at the back. He stood for the first time. He walked with slow, purposeful steps, approached the bailiff and leaned in. They exchanged quiet words. Then the bailiff looked toward the bench and nodded. Once the judge's eyes narrowed, he picked up the microphone. "Miss Monroe," he said again. "Please remain seated. There's been a development." Celine's head whipped around, and for the first time all day, she looked afraid. The judge's gavel tapped twice, not to end the session, but to pause it. A ripple of tension moved through the room like heat off pavement. "We'll take a brief recess," he announced, though no one moved. Counselors and parties involved. "Please join me in chambers." Vincent Wexler didn't wait for an invitation. He walked with a precision that felt military, his coat never wrinkling, his eyes never shifting. He passed Celine without so much as a glance. But she flinched anyway. I followed the flow of suits and silence down a narrow hallway to the private judicial chamber. The wood felt older here, less performative, like the truth had no need for grand architecture. The judge closed the door behind us. "Mr. Wexler, I assume you're not here on vacation." Vincent nodded once and placed a sealed manila envelope on the desk. A faint watermark from the Department of Justice shimmered under the chamber lights. "You'll want to review this before allowing the hearing to proceed further," he said evenly. "It pertains directly to the misuse of sealed federal records, namely Exhibit 14B, which was submitted to malign Miss Caitlin Monroe's credibility." Celine opened her mouth, probably to object, but the judge raised a hand. "You're saying Exhibit 14B was obtained illegally." Vincent tapped the envelope. She used a court system log and credential not assigned to her. "We've been monitoring several flagged queries made under Judge Harmon's staff. Access credentials dating back 2 months. All tied to this hearing. All tied to Miss Celine Monroe." I remained silent. I didn't breathe. I watched as Celine's expression stiffened like fresh clay under heat. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You can't just barge in here with some vague accusation. I'm not here to accuse Vincent. Cut her off. I'm here to confirm what we've already documented. You accessed mental health records sealed under HIPAA protections. That's a federal offense." The room went very still. Vincent turned slightly toward me, but never softened. "We've been investigating a pattern of ethical violations tied to Miss Monroe's legal activities. This custody hearing gave us probable cause to expand scope." Celine looked at the judge like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You can't take his word over mine." I've worked in this system for years. That's exactly why this is serious, the judge said flatly. You know better, Celine's attorney, who had been silent so far, finally spoke. We'll need time to review any evidence. Vincent was already flipping open the packet. The top page bore Celine's name, time-stamped login credentials, and a list of accessed files, including mine. This isn't a gray area, Vincent said. It's black-letter law. Miss Monroe's behavior suggests a pattern of manipulation that includes falsifying metadata and weaponizing seal documents for personal advantage. And then he said, the line that hit harder than anything I expected. I'm not here to defend you. Miss Monroe, he told me, I'm here to expose her. Something shifted inside me. Not relief, not triumph, just clarity. For years, I'd thought maybe I'd misremembered, exaggerated, made too much of things. But here it was. Paper dates, facts, still. Celine wasn't done. She turned toward me slowly, her tone quiet but slicing. You think I'm scared of you? I built this courtroom. You're just a footnote. I let stick around too long. My hands clenched, but not with fear. I stepped closer, voice low but steady. Then it's time to tear it down. The hallway felt colder when I stepped out of chambers, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees just for me. My heels echoed against the marble, the click-clack cadence of a woman trying to keep it together. Celine was already there, leaned casually against the wall as if she hadn't just been exposed. Her face was calm, almost amused. She tilted her head when I approached. Cute little show back there, she said, her voice low and syrupy. But you should know, it only takes one signature to have you held for a 72-hour mental health evaluation. You sure you want to keep pushing? Her words landed soft, but stung. Sharp around us. Courthouse staff moved with deliberate ignorance. No one made eye contact. No one intervened. That was the thing about power. It didn't have to be loud. It could whisper in hallways dressed in a navy pantsuit and a smirk. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Not quite yet. My chest was tight, breath shallow. Celine smiled wider. Didn't think so, she said, brushing past like she'd won again. I didn't know where my feet were taking me until I found myself on the stone steps outside. The sun was out now, harsh and too bright, like it hadn't gotten the memo that everything inside me had gone dim. I sat down on a bench under a bare tree, just enough shade to hide in, not enough to comfort. A few pigeons scuffled around the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't look at them, I just stared at my hands still shaking. A memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 22. There'd been a snowstorm, unexpected and brutal. I was locked out of our shared apartment because Celine forgot I was supposed to be home that weekend. I pounded on the door for 30 minutes before a neighbor let me in. That night, I had my first full-blown panic attack. Our mother told me I was being dramatic. A week later, I was in therapy, not to get better. To be quiet. Celine doesn't lie. My mother had said she just remembers things better than you. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over Langston's contact. I typed, "Maybe it's not worth it." Then I stared at the blinking cursor for too long. "You okay, ma'am?" I raised my head. A young woman stood a few feet away holding out a water bottle. Her courthouse badge read Naira. Her brown eyes were cautious, kind. "I saw what happened," she said. "That woman, your sister, she treats people like tissue paper, uses them, tosses them." I accepted the bottle. "You work for her, interned no more." A pause, then she added, "You didn't let her win yet, so don't the words hit harder than they should have." I'd said something like that once years ago to a freshman at college whose roommate trashed her art project out of jealousy. I didn't even remember the girl's name, but I remembered her tears and how she smiled when I told her not to give away her victory just because someone louder said she'd lost. I stood up. My body still felt unsteady, but something inside me had locked back into place. Nira watched me. "Whatever you're about to do, make it hurt," she said, Her tone half joking, half hopeful. I gave a nod. It won't just hurt, it'll echo. I walked to the far end of the courtyard and dialed Langston. He picked up on the first ring. Talk to me, I'm ready to file the motion. I said, use the full clause whistleblower status, no redactions. There was a pause. Then the familiar grit of his voice returned. It's about time, Monroe, he said. And the phone went silent. By the time I stepped back into the courtroom, the air had shifted. The chatter was gone. The judge's assistant stood by the double doors, instructing reporters and visitors to leave. Closed session, only legal counsel, essential staff, and involved parties would remain. Langston gave me a subtle nod as I took my seat. His calm steadied me until the opposing attorney stood up and requested permission to call an expert witness in defense of character context. That phrase alone sent warning bells through my chest. The judge adjusted his glasses. Proceed. The doors opened again. A tall, lean man with a goatee and cold, polished demeanor walked in. Adrian Wolfe, the clerk announced. My stomach turned. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Years ago, during the fallout of my second year at Harvard, he'd been mentioned once briefly by my department head. But I had never been his patient, never even spoken to him. Dr. Wolfe took the stand with a practiced ease. I'm a clinical psychiatrist with 22 years of experience. He began during the Harvard International Fellowship Cycle. I was consulted regarding a fellow named Caitlin Monroe, concerns of erratic behavior, emotional dysregulation, and institutional defiance. A ripple of murmurs. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I heard someone Langston maybe say, objection. But it was drowned out in the sudden noise. The judge rapped his gavel once. Let him finish. Then you may rebut. Celine sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze locked on me like she was watching a performance. She'd already seen the ending to Dr. Wolfe continued, though no inpatient treatment was formally mandated. I advised temporary leave from duties. It's my professional opinion that Miss Monroe's profile reflected patterns of paranoia and displacement. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to stand to scream, but I did neither. I waited. I needed to wait. Langston slid a manila envelope across the table inside a scanned letter bearing the signature of Professor Lila Marks. The fellowship director, I unfolded the sheet with shaky fingers. It read, to whom it may concern. Caitlin Monroe remained in active standing during all fellowship duties. She was never placed under evaluation, nor did she meet with any psychiatric staff. Any statement to the contrary is inaccurate and not reflected in institutional records. The judge asked if I had anything to submit. I got up, Your Honor. I respectfully request permission to present sealed records for my academic file, including internal grievances and personal statements on the record. And I'd like to be the one who reads them. There was a pause, a long one. The judge looked at me for a beat, then nodded once I opened the folder. My hands were cold. I had memorized every word over the years, but this was the first time I'd ever said them aloud. I, Caitlin Monroe, filed a confidential harassment complaint against 3 peer fellows on March 17, 2014. No action was taken. Flip on May 9, 2014. I was treated for a stress-induced ulcer following months of work sabotage. I was told I was overreacting. Flip emails between Professor Marks and the grant committee indicate concern about interpersonal targeting with Caitlin. As the documented target, I kept going. The courtroom was silent. No coughs, no rustling paper, just my voice and the truth. Celine didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch when I reached the final page. I paused. I was told you always make things harder than they need to be. That wasn't a diagnosis. That was a warning. I folded the record closed with trembling fingers and looked straight into Celine's eyes. Outside the courtroom, the early fall breeze rustled through the live oaks lining Broad Street. I stood at the base of the courthouse steps, taking in the stillness before the storm. My breath fogged faintly in the cool morning air. The silence around me oddly soothing. I hadn't slept much in the past week. Not since the hearing adjourned. Not since I read those words aloud. But for the first time in a long while, I hadn't woken up feeling small as I entered the courthouse lobby. I caught whispers, a hushed tension in the air like something unscripted was unfolding. Two clerks near the security desk were murmuring, just barely audible. "Did you hear who's presiding today?" "I thought Judge Merrill had this docket." "No, Merrill's out sick. Substitution was filed late last night. Monroe's on the bench now." I paused mid-step. "Monroe? Not me, Langston." My stomach dropped and flipped at the same time I walked slowly through the metal detector, my bag held tight against my chest. By the time I stepped into the gallery, all eyes were already forward. The court officers stood tall by the door. "All rise for the Honorable Judge, Langston Monroe, presiding." I froze. He entered from the side door in full robe, stoic, unreadable. Not even a flicker of recognition on his face. The same man who once traced constellations on my back at 2 a.m. was now seated behind the elevated bench, wooden gavel in hand. Judicial calm masking the fire I knew burned beneath Celine. Seated 2 rows up with her attorney, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You have got to be kidding me." Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve. "Quiet," she ignored him. "This is a joke, right? Her fiancé gets to decide the case now. What's next? Jury made up of bridesmaids." Langston lifted his head slightly. "Miss Monroe, please be advised. I filed my judicial recusal from all familial affiliations effective 3 weeks ago. My assignment today is strictly procedural and was confirmed through the clerk's office." He tapped the file in front of him. "Now, shall we proceed?" Celine shrank back. Lips pursed tight, her voice didn't carry that same confidence anymore. Langston turned to the courtroom assistant. "Please enter into Record Exhibit 7, see full audit disclosure of Monroe Family Trust and associated nonprofit activities." The screen came alive behind him. Lines of figures, names of vendors. Timestamps, wire transfers. I'd seen the paperwork. Yes, but hearing it read aloud by someone with the power to act on it made my skin tingle. Langston's voice was even, but every word was a scalpel. According to this report, $480,000 was funneled from the Monroe Women's Education Fund through Shell Vendors, Shell Heart Consulting, Red Tree Digital, and Astor Foundation. All traced back to Miss Celine Monroe's personal accounts. Celine opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Her lawyer pressed a hand to his brow. Langston continued, tone firm. These transfers occurred during fiscal years when the trust was inactive, meaning Caitlin Monroe's portion was frozen but used as silent collateral in private debt clearance. I sat still. I didn't interrupt. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. This was not vengeance. This was verification. Langston looked down at the bench, then back to the parties. The court finds substantial cause to pursue a civil breach inquiry under Fiduciary Violation Code 38-4. Be effective immediately. This matter is referred to the Department of Justice for investigation. Celine flinched. I watched her eyes dart left, then right. Searching for an exit that wasn't there, Langston didn't look at me once, not even after the ruling. He stood, nodded toward the clerk, and exited the bench as cleanly as he had entered. Only then did I stand too, but not to follow him. I turned toward the back of the courtroom and caught my reflection in the tall glass panel near the door. Same dark suit, same posture, but something was different. My face didn't look small anymore. I didn't look like someone waiting to be picked or protected or proven. I looked like someone who finally belonged. And not because I fought louder. I didn't win because I yelled. I won because I waited. I proved. And I refused to disappear. The courtroom was beginning to empty. Shoes clicked against the old marble floors. Papers shuffled into briefcases, and distant chatter hummed like an engine winding down. I had just reached the tall oak doors, fingers grazing the cold brass handle when I heard it. "Your Honor, we request an emergency injunction." The words sliced through the room like glass on stone. I turned. Celine's attorney was on his feet, waving a legal motion in the air like a flag of desperation. This entire session is compromised. Conflict of interest. The presiding judge is the romantic partner of the petitioner. We believe bias has tainted every ruling. Celine's eyes were wide, not frightened, but electric. She was smiling again, the same smile she wore when she cornered me in the hallway last week, the same one she wore the day she forged my name on that grant. Langston had already stepped down, protocol observed, but he turned back slightly, his mouth set in a line. The bailiff retrieved the motion and passed it to the clerk. Within moments, it landed in the hands of Judge Margaret Evelyn Rhodes, retired, but pulled in for emergency review. "Judge Rhodes has taken emergency oversight," the clerk announced. "Please remain seated. I did not speak." Not quite yet. Celine, now almost giddy, leaned into her attorney's shoulder and whispered something. His chest puffed. He must have thought they'd backed me into a corner. I reached into my bag, the same leather portfolio I'd carried since the first hearing. The same one my father gave me when I graduated. I hadn't opened it publicly until now. I walked back toward the bench. Heel's deliberate pulse, steady. I handed the sealed envelope to the clerk, who passed it along. "Your Honor," I said calmly. "That document contains an affidavit notarized 2 months before my father passed away. I ask that it be entered into the sealed record." Judge Rhodes adjusted her glasses. "Do you understand what this means?" "Miss Monroe, once I open this, we proceed under sworn admission." "There's no taking it back, I understand," I said. And I did. The judge broke the wax seal. Her brows lifted ever so slightly as she began reading. She paused once, then twice, and then read aloud. "I, Franklin J. Monroe, being of sound mind and clear intent, do hereby declare that the initial concept funding and operational proposal for the Monroe Women's Education Fund were the sole creation of Caitlin Monroe. I insisted her sister Celine be presented as the face of the foundation, only to protect the family's image and to secure traditional donor confidence. I deeply regret this decision." The courtroom didn't erupt. It imploded silently. The words continued. Signed, dated, witnessed, notarized. I took from Caitlin what she built. I let Celine pretend. I told myself it was for the greater good. But I know now it was cowardice. "Celine, shut up. This is fake. He would have never judged." Rhodes held up a palm. "Sit down." "Miss Monroe." Celine's mouth opened, then closed. Her voice, for the first time, had nowhere to go. Judge Rhodes continued. "The motion to suspend proceedings on the basis of conflict is denied. The document provided is valid. Furthermore, based on this affidavit and accompanying financial disclosures, this court rules that Miss Celine Monroe shall be removed from all founding and operational documents of the Monroe Women's Education Fund, effective immediately." She looked up, voice firm. "You may have had the spotlight, Miss Celine, but the light was never yours." Celine sat slowly. Her attorney pressed his fingers to his temple, already sensing the appeals process forming like storm clouds. The clerk walked toward me with a fresh copy of the revised Articles of Incorporation. My name alone now sat at the top, founder. I took the paper with steady hands and said nothing. There was nothing to say that the truth hadn't already spoken louder. The sun was beginning to dip outside the courtroom windows, casting long, amber light across the benches. It touched Celine's face, but for once, she wasn't basking in it. She looked smaller now, not ruined, but exposed. And me, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a woman who'd been walking with stones in her pockets for years and finally set them down. Truth? It turns out, isn't a firework. It's a weight. one that settles so deeply, no one can lift it for you. But once it lands, there's no denying it exists. Power didn't look like shouting. It looked like holding the truth until it was too heavy to ignore. 3 weeks past the courthouse had faded into memory. Not gone, but quieter now, like thunder after a storm. My name had been cleared, my rights restored, my work, legally mine again. But freedom, that was still something I was learning how to carry. That morning I arrived early, before the staff, before the noise, before the world. The sun was barely stretching over the rooftops, casting amber streaks across the sidewalk in front of the news center. A pair of sparrows hopped along the concrete as if they too were checking the place out. The community center had been rebuilt from the inside out, literally. The court had ordered full financial restitution. The shell companies were shut down. The crooked contracts revoked. Every siphoned dollar clawed back and returned. Inside it smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. The walls, now a soft dove gray, were bare for now, waiting for art from the girls who would soon fill this space. I walked through the halls, slowly touching door frames, window ledges, the edges of the bulletin board in the common room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself before turning a corner. There were no shadows left to dodge. It was mine now. All of it, not just on paper. In truth, Celine hadn't apologized. She hadn't looked at me since the ruling a week ago. She'd held a brief press conference just long enough to announce her voluntary step back from public leadership to focus on personal reflection. She didn't say my name, she didn't say sorry. She blamed the shifting culture and miscommunication on like the foundation had simply malfunctioned on its own. People asked me if I wanted to go on air, respond. Some even pitched a book deal. I said no to all of it. Let her fill the silence with spin. I was done filling mine with defense. Langston had visited once, just once. He didn't bring flowers or excuses, just stood beside me while we watched the staff prep the art tables. He asked gently, "Do you want me to stay?" I took a long breath before answering. "I think I need to see who I am without someone rescuing me," I said. "Even if that someone meant well." He gave a nod. He didn't argue. He just placed a hand on my shoulder for a moment, then left. Some things I've learned aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be remembered, right? Later that morning, I stopped by the art room. A handful of girls were already there, led by a new volunteer named Avery. She was no older than 20, eyes bright behind thick glasses. One of the girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old, was sitting at the far end of the table working intently with red paper in her small hands. When I approached, she glanced up and smiled shyly without a word. She held something out to me. It was a paper crane folded neatly carefully. The wings a bit lopsided but proud. I froze. Years ago, I'd made one just like it. I had given it to Celine when we were teens. After she'd won her first debate competition, I thought it was a gesture, a quiet token of sisterhood. She'd laughed, crumpled, it said. I was always doing weird little things that no one asked for. Now here was a child offering me the same shape, no sarcasm, no demand, just something beautiful, made with care and given freely. I took the crane gently from her hand. It was still warm from her fingers. Thank you, I said, voice hushed. She beamed. I make them when I feel calm. Maybe you needed one. I gave a nod. Perhaps I did. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, brushing the sidewalk with gold. I stepped out with the paper crane still in my hand, sunlight on my face, and for once I didn't need to explain anything to anyone, not to Celine, not to Langston, and not to the media, or the past, or the pages of sealed affidavits, because sometimes healing doesn't raw. Sometimes it folds itself into a small red crane and says, "You're allowed to begin again." The crane was still warm from the girl's hand. I tucked it close and walked into the sun.